Vegas never sleeps, but that night, the casino wished it had. The mirage was alive with its usual fever. Dice clattered, roulette wheels spun, the sharp snap of cards on felt mixed with the metallic rhythm of coins crashing into trays. The air was thick with perfume, cigarette smoke, and the faint ozone hum of neon lights bleeding through glass. High rollers leaned in close over their drinks, voices rising and breaking like waves against the ceaseless background noise of slot machines. Dealers in pressed vests moved with mechanical grace, their smiles practiced, hollow, meant to distract from the way the house always won. At the center of it all stood the guards. They weren't just employees, they behaved like kings. Tall, broad, dressed in black suits with earpieces glinting under the chandeliers, they leaned against the walls and prowled between tables, radiating the casual arrogance of men who thought the casino belonged to them. Every laugh was a little too loud, every joke at a guest's expense delivered just loud enough for others to hear. They smirked when a tourist lost a stack of chips, whispered insults when an elderly man stumbled away from the bar. They weren't there to protect, they were there to dominate. Into this carnival of noise and power walked a man who seemed to carry his own silence. Chuck Norris entered without a word, without the usual entourage or the flashbulbs of photographers. No tuxedo, no dramatic entrance. Just jeans, a plain shirt, a jacket that looked worn but clean. His gait was unhurried, steady. He wasn't there to draw attention, he came simply to meet a friend, maybe sit for a coffee before heading back into the night. But attention followed him anyway. The moment he stepped onto the marble floor, the air shifted. Not because he demanded it, but because people knew. They had seen his face on screens for decades, seen the impossible fights, the endless jokes, the legends. Now he was here, in the flesh, older, quieter, but somehow heavier with presence. Conversations faltered, dice hesitated mid-roll, and then life resumed, only now, it carried a subtle tremor. From across the floor, one of the guards spotted him. His smirk widened, and he jabbed an elbow into his partner's ribs. "Look at that," he muttered, loud enough for a passing cocktail waitress to hear. The old karate cowboy decided to crawl out of retirement. His friend laughed, a short bark that carried over the din. The words weren't meant for Chuck directly. Not yet. They were bait, tossed casually into the current, waiting to see if the legend would bite. Chuck didn't. He walked past the roulette tables, past the laughing clusters of tourists, eyes steady, posture straight, as though the noise couldn't touch him. He didn't so much as glance toward the guards. But silence has a way of cutting deeper than any reply. And the guards noticed. One leaned in closer, voice pitched to Carrie, "Hey, maybe he's looking for the senior discount at the buffet." A ripple of laughter followed from a nearby table, cheap and nervous. A woman glanced between the guards and Chuck, her face tightening with secondhand embarrassment. Still, Chuck said nothing. He paused briefly at the edge of the bar, scanning the room as if searching for someone. His eyes were calm, almost distant, but there was no mistaking it, he had heard every word. And the way his gaze lingered for a moment on the guards made them shift on their feet, if only for a heartbeat, before arrogance settled back in. The casino glimmered with excess, gold trim, mirrored ceilings, fountains shaped like Roman gods. But in that moment, it felt fragile, as though the spectacle was paper-thin and could burn away with a single spark. Beneath the laughter and music lay something sharper, a tension coiled tight, waiting for release. The guards leaned against the wall again, pretending not to care, but their eyes never left him. They were used to controlling the floor, to being the unchallenged authority. And here was this man, walking quietly as if none of it mattered, refusing to acknowledge their game. That kind of defiance, unspoken and unintentional, was more dangerous than any insult. Guests felt it too. They didn't know why the air felt heavy, why conversation seemed to trail off when Norris passed by, but they felt it all the same. A couple near the blackjack table exchanged uneasy looks. The dealer's hands slowed on the cards. Even the slot machines, in their endless cycle of lights and jingles, seemed suddenly hollow. It wasn't a fight yet. Not even an argument. Just a few careless words, tossed into the glittering air. But already, the edges of the night were shifting. Something in the balance had tilted. And as Chuck found an empty stool near the bar, his hand resting lightly on the counter, his silence spoke louder than the guard's laughter. Somewhere deep down, everyone sensed it, the first spark had landed. And sparks, in Vegas, don't die quietly. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down below. The taller guard peeled himself off the wall like he was stepping into a role he had rehearsed 100 times. He straightened his tie, rolled his shoulders, and strode toward the bar with a grin sharpened to draw blood. His partner followed a pace behind, elbows wide, that lazy swagger of men who mistake uniforms for crowns. A few gamblers noticed the shift, the way prey notices a predator glance their way. Heads turned, conversations dipped, but no one intervened. "Evening, legend," the first guard said, planting his hands on the bar hard enough to rattle a glass. His voice was loud enough to reach the roulette wheel. "You here to sign autographs or fall asleep?" The crowd nearby chuckled, not because the line was clever, but because laughter fills silence, and silence was settling in heavy around them. Chuck didn't answer. He lifted his cup, sipped, set it back down. He turned slightly toward the mirror behind the bottles. In the reflection, he could see them both, the guard leaning in, the other standing back, arms crossed, scanning the room as if he owned it. Chuck's face was unreadable, but the stillness in his body made people shift in their seats. The silence pressed harder. The guard filled it with another jab. "Big fan," he said, tone dripping with mock respect. "We all love the kicks, the slow mo, the cowboy routine. But this," he gestured at the chandeliers, the chips stacked like towers, the sequin dresses, "this is real life. Out here, nobody cares about movie magic." A woman in white whispered something to her partner, her eyes locked on Chuck. A dealer's hands hesitated before cutting the deck, just long enough to draw nervous glances from his table. Even the bartender, cloth in hand, stopped polishing and stood too still for too long. Chuck turned his head, his voice even, as if he were noting the weather. "A real man doesn't measure strength with words." It landed harder than a punch. No emphasis, no bravado, just truth stated plainly. People nearby inhaled sharply. Some smiled. Others looked away, embarrassed for the guard who'd just been reduced without being touched. The second guard laughed, too loud, trying to reclaim control. "Hear that? Pastor Norris wants to preach." He scanned the crowd for support, and a few nervous laughs came back, but weaker than before. The first guard leaned closer, until Chuck could smell his cologne under the smoke. "Here's the only thing that counts here, house rules. And the rules say you don't come in here acting like you're somebody." He let it hang, then added, sharper, "Not unless you can prove it." The bartender muttered, "Tommy," as if naming him might tether him. It didn't. Chuck studied the mirror again. Around them, space was opening. Guests eased back, pretending not to watch while every eye was fixed on him. The casino floor was rearranging itself into a circle without anyone admitting it. The crowd had turned into an arena. "Prove it how?" Chuck asked, calm as stone. The guard smiled like he'd won. "Start by apologizing for wasting our time. Or we'll walk you out." It was no longer a joke. The second guard cracked his neck theatrically. "Or carried out," he said, grinning wide. His voice echoed just enough to remind everyone of the line that had been crossed. Chuck rose from the stool. No dramatic gesture, no sudden flare of energy. He simply stood, aligning himself from the ground up. Shoulders balanced, feet planted, weight centered. That quiet symmetry radiated something the guards hadn't expected. The audience felt it too, an instinctive recognition of control. "I came to meet a friend," Chuck said. "I'll finish my coffee and leave. That's all." He looked directly at the guard, unblinking. "There's nothing to prove." The guard's grin slipped. He nodded subtly toward the far wall. Two more suits began to drift closer, casual, like shadows pretending to be men. The circle tightened. "Sir," the lead guard said, forcing his voice flat, "we're going to walk you out. No trouble, no fuss." "And if I say no?" Chuck asked. "Then we show you the difference between movies and reality." Someone at the blackjack table coughed, short and sharp. Another voice muttered "don't" under their breath, too quiet to claim. The whole floor seemed to draw back its breath and hold it. Chuck drained the last of his coffee, set the cup neatly on the napkin, and slid the stool aside with his calf so no one would trip. The courtesy was so disarming that the guard flushed deeper. "You wear uniforms," Chuck said evenly. "That makes you responsible for how this ends." The second guard laughed again. "Listen to Grandpa. Thinks he gets to set the rules." He spread his arms to the crowd. "Watch close, folks. Childhood's about to meet reality." The first guard reached. Not yet a grab, just a touch, testing. His fingers brushed the fabric of Chuck's sleeve. That tiny contact felt like the snap of a trap closing. The casino froze. Cards stopped mid-shuffle. A slot machine rang a jackpot no one cared to claim. A tourist raised his phone with shaking hands. Somewhere, a glass chimed faintly in the sink. Chuck didn't move away. He let the hand rest there, then turned his wrist as though unlocking a door. The bones shifted, the guard's grip faltered, pressure rebounded into his own knuckles. His eyes flickered, shocked not by pain but by the sudden reminder that control could be stolen with almost nothing. The crowd leaned closer, breathless. The invisible line between noise and violence had been crossed. It wasn't words anymore. The game had changed. And for the first time that night, the guards realized silence could fight back. The circle wasn't planned, yet it formed as if the casino itself had willed it. Chairs scraped quietly against the patterned carpet, tables shifted a little farther back, and conversations trailed into silence. The air smelled of cigar smoke and spilt gin, layered with the static of anticipation. Guests created space without admitting why, the way animals clear ground when a storm is coming. Suddenly the grand casino floor felt less like a palace of light and more like a ring under chandeliers, every guest a spectator. 4 guards now stood opposite Chuck. Tommy, the leader, kept one hand near his sleeve, his jaw tight. The second man, thick through the chest, flanked right, blocking the nearest exit. 2 more drifted in from the far side with smug smiles that pretended confidence but betrayed the tension in their shoulders. Radios murmured static. The weight of neon and chandeliers pressed down like judgment. Chuck didn't adjust his stance. He simply existed there, centered, his frame stacked evenly, shoulders relaxed, posture balanced in a way that suggested permanence rather than defiance. It was quiet, ordinary, but the quiet itself unsettled. People shifted uneasily, the stillness was heavier than aggression. "Sir, this is your last warning," Tommy said. The word "sir" clung awkwardly to his throat. Chuck freed his sleeve with a subtle twist, turning his wrist so the cloth belonged to him again. No force, just direction. The murmur that passed through the crowd carried a note of awe, how something so small could strip authority without drawing blood. The second guard, embarrassed by the murmurs, lunged in. He tried to grip Chuck's arm the way one grabs luggage, certain of control. But the arm didn't yield, it redirected. Chuck dipped his elbow and pivoted the wrist into a small, neat circle. The man's balance betrayed him, knees bending before pride could intervene. He landed awkwardly on the carpet, palms down, muttering a sound closer to surprise than pain. Chuck released him instantly, the technique finished the moment it worked. The silence afterward was alive. The roulette wheel spun somewhere behind, but no one heard its clatter. A woman's laugh caught in her throat. The bartender froze mid-polish, towel in hand. Dealers dealt mechanically but their eyes kept drifting toward the scene. "Hey," the third guard barked, more out of nerves than courage. He lunged clumsily. Chuck pivoted, guiding him forward into the rail of the bar. The guard struck it hard enough to sting, but not to injure. The thud echoed under the chandeliers. He turned red, humiliation hotter than pain. Tommy charged next, straight in, reaching for Chuck's collar. Norris raised an arm, letting Tommy's grip close on a forearm that suddenly had bone behind it. With a small shift of hips and a precise lever, Chuck sent him stumbling to one knee. A gasp rippled through the crowd. It wasn't violence. It was administration, clean and exact, like signing a form correctly. The fourth guard finally advanced, cautious but committed. He raised his hands in a boxer's guard, circling. Chuck didn't move forward. He gave no target. The stillness was unnerving, like staring at an unlocked door without knowing what waited beyond. The quiet guard hesitated, sweat glistening under casino lights. The second guard, red-faced from the carpet, shouted desperately, he assaulted staff. His words rang hollow. No one moved to help. The guests had seen how gently Chuck had handled them. No broken bones, no cruelty, only restraint. Tommy growled, pushing up from the floor, pride bruised deeper than muscle. He lunged again, arms spread, aiming to lock Chuck into a clinch. Chuck's palm touched his triceps, his wrist redirected, and weight betrayed him again. Tommy stumbled, hitting his knees once more. The crowd's reaction split, some smirked with satisfaction, others stiffened, uncomfortable at watching authority crumble so neatly. The bartender hadn't moved at all. His towel hung limp, as if surrendering. A woman whispered to her phone, he's not even angry, her voice trembling with disbelief. Call Metro, the second guard spat, but it sounded desperate. A radio crackled, a dispatcher's bored voice cutting through the heavy silence. Chuck finally spoke, his voice level, almost casual, you don't want police. You want a scene. Don't make one. The sentence hit harder than any throw. It reframed everything. This wasn't a fight, it was theater. The guards weren't protecting, they were performing. And Chuck had refused the script. The third guard, jaw clenched, tried one more grab at the back of Chuck's jacket. But the cloth slipped through his fingers as Chuck dipped a shoulder and pivoted. The man was redirected neatly forward, stumbling into empty space where Norris had stood a heartbeat earlier. The audience gasped again. It was becoming clear, this wasn't brawling. It was something older, simpler, honed. Chuck wasn't attacking, he was correcting. He borrowed aggression, returned it politely, and let men fall over themselves. Each motion was controlled, minimal, final. That economy terrified more than any flurry of blows could. Tommy wiped his brow, eyes wide with humiliation. He circled, trying to herd Chuck toward the fountain's slick stone floor. Chuck refused to move, feet rooted, presence immovable. The refusal itself felt like defiance, heavier than any strike. Last chance, Tommy hissed, breathing hard, anger cracking in his voice. Chuck's only response was a nod, small and ordinary. And then the second guard moved, lunging once more, hand outstretched for Chuck's shoulder. Fingers brushed cloth, intent heavy. The room held its breath. Cards stilled, chips frozen mid-stack, cameras raised, ready to immortalize whatever came next. The first real explosion was about to begin. The first guard's fall shattered the illusion of control. A hush struck the casino floor, but only for a second. Then came the crash of voices, the shuffle of chairs, the clatter of chips and glass. Two more guards launched forward together, driven less by orders than by wounded pride. Chuck didn't tense. He simply pivoted, breath low and steady. The first man aimed high, arms sweeping for Chuck's collar. Norris shifted an inch inside the strike, his thumb sliding the radius bone into a circle. The guard's own momentum carried him past balance, hip striking the edge of a roulette table. The wheel spun uselessly, scattering numbers into light while the croupier stumbled back, eyes wide. The second man went low, arms wide to scoop Chuck up. But the weight found nothing. Chuck sank a fraction, palm against the man's chest, wrist rotated like a lever. The bear hug collapsed into knees on carpet. The guard blinked up, stunned at how fast the ground had risen. For a beat, silence reigned again. Then the room erupted. Phones rose like torches, red lights blinking. Someone gasped loud enough to echo, someone else laughed nervously and stopped when no one joined. A woman whispered, "He's not even trying," and the words rippled outward like wind across water. "Stop him," the floor manager barked, voice cracking. He clutched his clipboard like a shield. Now. From the back wall, more black suits peeled off from the shadows, 5, 6, too many to count. Their shoes struck the patterned carpet with purpose. What began as an incident was now a challenge. The casino wasn't defending itself anymore, it was defending pride. Chuck stood where he was. No grand stance, no show. Just rooted, shoulders relaxed, eyes watching 3 seconds ahead. It made the charging guards look frantic, their aggression messy against his stillness. One guard, already humiliated, roared and rushed back in. Chuck let the roar arrive before the man did. A wrist redirected, a step stolen, and suddenly the guard crashed shoulder first into a slot machine. Bells rang, lights flashed, coins chimed in hollow victory. The crowd gasped as if the casino itself had joined the fight and lost. 2 others tried to trap him together, one high, one low. Chuck walked between them. A palm redirected a punch into emptiness, a knee brushed shin, a wrist circled harmlessly to its owner's chest. They collapsed in sequence, not battered but dismantled, as if their own bodies had betrayed them. Phones caught the chaos, but angles never told the truth. Live streams went shaky with disbelief, clips already racing through feeds with captions like, "Casino turned into dojo." The manager screamed again, "Shut him down," but his authority sounded thinner with every syllable. A cocktail waitress crouched behind a pillar, tray trembling in her hands. Guests stared not with fear, but fascination, they weren't sure if they were watching violence or choreography. Another guard grabbed Chuck's jacket lapels, triumphant. It lasted less than a second. Chuck's thumbs pressed inside the grips, wrists rotated downward, and the same jacket became a weapon against the man holding it. The guard dropped to his knees, groaning, palms flat on the carpet in forced surrender. The circle widened. More guests leaned in, whispering disbelief. No one was gambling anymore. Cards lay untouched, chips abandoned mid-hand. The casino's heartbeat wasn't roulette or dice, it was the rhythm of boots against carpet, the rhythm of Chuck's breathing. And then the elevator chimed. The doors opened on 5 fresh guards, faces blank with certainty. They hadn't seen what happened, only heard the command, "End it." Their stride was rehearsed, confident, unshaken by the chaos surrounding them. Chuck rolled his shoulders once, a movement barely visible, more like loosening a hinge than preparing for battle. He placed himself in the only clean patch of carpet left. The crowd shifted again, creating a new ring, murmurs climbing into a roar. The manager, red-faced and hoarse, pointed at him like a general losing ground, "End it now." 5 guards advanced in unison. The casino, once a palace of neon, became a coliseum waiting for history to write its next line. They moved together now, a tight phalanx of 5 men in dark suits, their polished shoes thudding against the patterned carpet like a drumline. The spectacle of the casino, roulette wheels spinning, dice rattling, dealers calling bets, was gone. In its place, an arena disguised in neon. Guests stood back, phones lifted high, eyes wide. Some cheered, some whispered nervously, and a few clutched their drinks with white knuckles, unable to look away. Chuck shifted once, so small it could have been a stretch. He lowered his weight into the floor as though anchoring himself. No bravado, no theatrics, just readiness. The first guard lunged with a classic wrestler's collar tie, both arms hunting Chuck's neck. A circle no wider than a dinner plate wrote itself inside his reach. Chuck's forearm redirected, his hip rotated like a hinge, and the guard's body betrayed him. In a blink he toppled into a poker table. Chips scattered, cards fluttered through the air, and the dealer's face froze in astonishment. The second guard came hard, straight down the middle, a battering ram meant to overwhelm with momentum. Chuck erased the attack instead of countering it. A sidestep, one palm to the sternum, and the man's breath collapsed inward. He buckled, knees folding neatly under him, his shoulder striking the corner of a roulette stool. The ball spun in frantic circles before settling on a number no one had bet. Another grabbed from the side, aiming to pin arms and lock him up. Chuck leaned into it, not away. Bone met bone, wrist slid behind triceps, a pivot sealed the shoulder. The guard's face twisted, lips parting in a groan as his own frame taught him pain's geometry. Chuck loosened the hold just shy of damage, a mercy deliberate enough to sting pride more than muscle. The crowd was a living organism, screaming, gasping, recording, narrating. Streams online exploded with comments, disbelief spreading faster than sound. "This isn't a fight," someone muttered, "this is a lesson." Two more came together, one aiming high, fists tight, the other diving low for legs. Chuck waited for rhythm, then stepped into their timing. The punch swung through air that no longer held its target, the tackle hit nothing but carpet. A short kick snapped against an inner thigh, harmless to watch but decisive in feel. Both men tangled into each other, collapsing with curses. The floor manager's voice cracked above the chaos, "Shut him down." His command rang hollow, shredded by the acoustics of panic. The cocktail waitress abandoned her tray, pressing palms together in silent awe. The gamblers no longer gambled, dealers froze mid-deal. Every eye belonged to the fight. A larger guard, red with fury, seized Chuck's jacket and drove forward with a waist lock. For the first time, the scene looked grim. The crowd gasped, some thinking the tide had turned. Chuck simply dropped his weight an inch, thumbs pressing into the attacker's grip until it weakened. His hips turned, his foot found purchase, and gravity became an ally. The waist lock dissolved. The guard stumbled, catching himself on his hands with a slap that stung louder than applause. Noise detonated, cheers, whistles, curses. People were no longer divided by fear or admiration, they were enthralled. It wasn't a brawl anymore, it was theater where truth had replaced script. Then came a flicker of real danger. One guard's hand dipped to his belt, fingers brushing the baton holstered at his side. The audience saw it, and the air collapsed into silence. Chuck's eyes locked on the hand. No rush, no threat, just 6 words steady and cold. "This is your last chance. Walk." The silence swallowed everything. Even the fountains outside the casino seemed to pause. The guard froze, torn between pride and instinct. His hand twitched again. A snap click of leather broke the quiet, and the baton started to rise. Chuck moved first. He stepped in close, seized the wrist, and curved its motion downward. The baton clattered onto the carpet, a hollow sound that cut deeper than violence. The guard's posture folded around Chuck's grip. No strike followed, just a controlled release, firm enough to show dominance, merciful enough to show choice. Guests exhaled as if saved from something they couldn't name. The youngest of the guards, jaw set, eyes bright with stubbornness, eyed the fallen baton. Chuck didn't even look directly at him. His head tilted, his voice quieter still. "Don't." The word froze him mid-step. For the first time all night, a guard retreated willingly, face pale, pride surrendered to wisdom. The others faltered. One raised his hands, palms open in surrender. Another muttered, "We're done," as if saying it aloud might undo humiliation. Their formation fractured. What had entered as a wedge of power left as scattered men. But not all. The biggest of them, chest heaving, launched in desperation, a final tackle meant to erase doubt. Chuck pivoted, hips slicing through the air, and the man sailed over an invisible edge. He crashed into the padded rail of a blackjack table. Chips avalanched in a plastic cascade, clattering onto the carpet like hailstones. The crowd erupted, the sound shaking the chandeliers. Phones caught everything, but no lens could capture the quiet center of it all, Chuck's breathing, steady as if he'd only walked across the room. 5 men down. One legend standing. And above it, the floor manager, pale and desperate, found his voice again. "Mr. Norris, perhaps we can resolve this privately." The casino wasn't just a casino anymore. It was a stage where pride had been broken, order dismantled, and respect demanded in the oldest language there is, control without cruelty. For a moment the casino seemed suspended, as if time itself refused to move. 5 guards lay scattered across the patterned carpet, chips shining under the chandeliers like broken glass. The roulette wheels had stopped spinning, the dealers frozen mid-gesture, the hum of music cut off long ago. What remained was the raw sound of breathing, heavy, uneven, human. Then the silence broke. Guests erupted into a confused storm, some cheering wildly, others murmuring in disbelief, dozens raising their phones high to capture what they would later swear was impossible. A chant began on one side, rolled through the crowd, and filled the entire floor. "Chuck. Chuck." It wasn't ironic. It wasn't playful. It carried gratitude, awe, even relief. Chuck didn't answer the chant with a gesture or a smile. He stood quietly, posture balanced, chest rising and falling as though he had only walked across the room. His calm was so complete it pressed against the noise, shaping the atmosphere more than words ever could. He bent briefly to nudge aside the fallen baton with his foot, practical, precise, as if tidying the space for those who had to continue working after he left. The floor manager, pale and sweating, stepped forward with 2 shaken supervisors. He tried for authority but sounded almost pleading. "Mr. Norris, perhaps we can settle this privately." The crowd hushed, waiting for the response. Even the battered guards turned their eyes toward the man who had put them down. Chuck met the manager's gaze, his voice steady and low, but somehow heard by all. "Your power isn't in money. It isn't in muscle. Real power is respect." The words cut deeper than any strike. They did not humiliate, they revealed. A weight settled over the floor, and the truth in his tone silenced the remaining whispers. No one dared answer. The manager tried to speak, then closed his mouth, nodding once as though acknowledging a verdict. The crowd parted on its own, creating a corridor toward the exit. People moved back respectfully, hands close to their sides, heads tilted as if recognizing something sacred in the ordinary act of departure. Chuck walked without hurry. He lifted a fallen stool, slid a few scattered chips back into a pile, restored order in small gestures that carried more meaning than violence ever could. Passing one young guard, the same who had almost drawn the baton, he paused, met his eyes for half a second, and said nothing. The silence was message enough. The guard lowered his head, not in shame but in recognition. At the bar, the bartender still clutched a towel like a shield. Chuck placed a folded bill on the counter and said simply, "Coffee was good." The line, ordinary on the surface, carried the weight of closure. The bartender exhaled sharply, as though released from a spell. He moved through the aisle of strangers who made space without being asked. No one reached for a handshake or selfie. Phones recorded, but hands stayed back. When something feels real, instinct teaches reverence. A boy near the door, no older than 10, blurted out, "Thanks," before his mother could hush him. Chuck paused, gave him a small nod, and replied, "Take care of your mom." The boy froze, eyes wide, already storing the moment as memory for life. At the threshold Chuck stopped. The crowd leaned in, expecting a last word, a bow, something to turn into legend. He gave them none. He simply stepped across the seam from carpet to corridor, disappearing into the cooler air of the strip. The door swung closed behind him with the quiet finality of a full stop. Inside, the casino tried to breathe again. Dealers shuffled cards with trembling hands, supervisors gathered the guards in embarrassed clusters, guests drifted back to tables pretending to care about games that suddenly felt trivial. Music resumed, faint at first, then louder, but it could not erase the residue of what had happened. Everyone in that room knew the place had changed. They had witnessed not a brawl but a lesson, strength without cruelty, dominance without ego, a refusal to be used for spectacle. Later the headlines would exaggerate, the clips would spread online stripped of nuance, but those present would carry the truer story. They would remember the night when a man reminded a casino, reminded all of them, that respect, once earned, cannot be outshone by neon. The mirage would return to business, dice rolling, lights flashing. Yet in its air hung something new, invisible but undeniable, the corridor through which Chuck Norris had walked, leaving behind a silence stronger than applause.